just when I thought we were in a format that I couldn't hate more than Duelist Alliance.
Two damn phones, Babylons can't crack the code.
Hey guys, it's Bats here. I'm in the library today just because I was looking over some old stuff. What old stuff was I actually looking at? Well, it was archetypes I really don't like. Now, don't get me wrong, these definitely aren't the worst archetypes of all time. In fact, actually, a number of them were very meta-defining and very powerful for their time, too. Especially once we got a little higher on the list. But these were particular decks that I really didn't enjoy, and I feel like the vast majority of Yugioh players just really couldn't contend with. Because, you know me, I decided to go ahead and compile a list of the top 11 decks that I despise. Why top 11? Because as you know, I like to go
even further beyond!
So sit back and enjoy the top 11 decks that I just can't stand. Number 11. Zombie Synchro. Now, it's not that I hate zombies within of themselves, it's just the flexibility of a deck like this. I remember this was probably one of the first meta decks that I really faced in my time, back in the 5Ds era, so it was around 2010, 2011, when Teledad was kind of a big thing too. And not only was Dark-Armed Dragon kind of a contender, and the fact that the Zombie Synchro deck just won't die. To this day, I'm looking at Light Sworn Synchro decks, and Light Zombie Synchro decks, and we just can't get rid of them. Triple Omegas, it has the best access to the best Synchro monsters in the entire toolbox, and the fact that I don't really like Synchro monsters, or 5Ds for that matter, really doesn't help. It's a personal bias more than anything else, and a lot of people really love the archetype, and really love the theme within of itself. It's just not really my style. So that's why it gets the number 11 spot. Number 10. Light Sworns. Now, this was another kind of semi-meta deck that I used to play against, and it actually got me into a really big anti-meta phase. So I played things like Mound of the Bound Malefics, Yugiohs were a really big thing for me back then. But it's another one of those decks that really just won't die, is another issue I have with it. And it makes a lot of... It's kind of like Burning Abyss. You plus from losing. If you send cards to the graveyard, you figure, oh, someone's running out of cards over there. Nope, Judgment Dragon. It also has a really broken boss monster that I don't think has any business being able to nuke a field when we can't have Chaos Emperor Dragon back. Yeah, I know it's two different effects, but I don't think we should have 3 Judgment Dragons and no Chaos Emperor Dragons. Sue me. I mean, aside from Gravekeeper, there was no real way for me to keep up with this deck for quite some time until it got power creeped. And that's probably what nuts at the number 10 spot. Number 9. Blackwings. And within of itself, I don't actually hate Blackwings. I think it's really kind of more the players. The fact that they think it's such an outstanding deck when it's a solid deck at best that's pretty well rounded and has a lot of flexibility. But they'll talk about it like it's the end all be all, and they'll talk about Crow from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds like he's the second coming of Joey Wheeler. I mean, come on. It's got some pretty cool quick synchro hybrids, and it also does have some pretty strong generic dark support that it can use on top of the random winged beast support. So it makes for a pretty interesting and powerful deck with a lot of different variations. And it's got a really incredible ceiling by the time it gets set up. It isn't very powerful nowadays, so that's when I get a lot of salty kind of Blackwing players that I'll run into every once in a while, and they just, I don't know, they'll flip the table. They're almost as bad as Raid Raptor players, but we'll talk about that another day. But Blackwings to the number 9 spot. Number 8. Masked Heroes. Now keep in mind, Elemental Heroes is actually one of my favorite archetypes. I even did an honest deck profile about Elemental Heroes. Problem that I have with the Masked Hero deck is that there are no heroes in it. I remember one point where the only 2 heroes were Shadow Mist and Bubble Man. Then you had things like Tin Goldfish and Goblindenberg, and a whole bunch of other random stuff that had nothing to do with Elemental Heroes. When I saw Elemental Heroes, I was super hyped. I thought, oh, awesome, I'm going to be able to make Omni Heroes, and I'm going to be able to summon Flame Wingman, and it just wasn't a reasonable sort of thing to expect, which is fine. And then when they did come out with more support, I was really excited again. Just to find out that people were only going to use 2 of them, and they were convinced that it was like the god tier deck over and over and over again. And eventually you get kind of tired of Dark Claw plus whatever coming out. Another issue I had with it was just how many monsters this deck had no damn business summoning coming out. You figure for a fusion-based archetype, you're going to be looking at a lot of fusion monsters. But then you get things like Totally Awesome, Bahamut Shark, and Cyber Dragon Infinity at their full power, and you sit there and wonder, how the hell did you make that with Shadow Mist? Again, not the deck within of itself, just the way people play it and the things that it does that bothers me the most. That's why it's only at the number 8 spot. Number 7. Shadalls. Honestly, I could have filled up half this list with Duelist Alliance, just because, well, I'm of the very unpopular opinion that Duelist Alliance was probably the worst time in Yu-Gi-Oh! It ran like 5 or 6 really ridiculously expensive decks that were the only things that could contend with each other at the time. Shadalls was one of them, mainly because you had things like Winda, Shikanaga, and Construct that were plaguing the meta. There weren't a lot of easy ways to get rid of them. They were fast, and any which way you got them to the graveyard or any which way you flipped them up, something terrible was going to happen. They made flip effects too powerful and their fusion was too accessible, especially given that they could just drop things out of the deck. Keep in mind, this sort of stuff popped up before Gem Knight Fusion and Red Eyes Fusion and things like that were a thing. So, and Odd Eyes Fusion, of course, too. So this is a pretty standard mechanic now, but just the fact that it broke the fusion mechanic the way it did, even worse than Elemental Heroes, that was enough to garner 7 times the deep-searing hatred that I had for any other deck. Number 6. Ghost Tricks. I vaguely remember that when I came back out of retirement after the 5Ds era at the start of Zexal, I saw Ghost Tricks at a tournament, and it didn't bother me so much. I had a Blue Eyes Dragunity hybrid, I had a lot of fun smashing on things, and that was literally the worst matchup that I possibly could have had. It also bothered me because there was no clear and apparent win condition. It would stop me from doing things, flip everything, and then that would be it. So I try and do a thing, well, I'm gonna stop you, but then we're gonna do nothing. They were all small monsters, a lot of really funky kind of targeting things, and there weren't a lot of easy ways out and around it outside of the big meta sort of stuff. It didn't bother me so much once I got a few bigger cards that could swarm a little bit faster, but for playing old school going into a new era, it was really kind of annoying. That and the fact that they really popularized hand effects too. Every single one of their cards was a hand trap. It drove me up the wall. They were always changing battle positions and just ruining my play, so I couldn't just have a good battle in Yu-Gi-Oh! More than enough to go ahead and push them to a number 6 spot. Number 5. Dragon Rulers. What can I say about Dragon Rulers? They're expensive, they were everywhere, and they were ridiculously powerful, had way too much advantage that they could generate, and honestly, nothing could stop them. I mean, yeah, spellbooks could hang, but you know, with the resources that you could develop with Dragon Rulers, their constant recurability, and just the overall ceiling with the consistency, it was hard to compete with anything that wasn't Dragon Rulers. They're just SOL. It was a pity. So, if you didn't like variety, Dragon Ruler format was for you. If you did like variety, move on. That was enough to push me to the number 5 spot. Number 4. Dark Worlds. And speaking of Dark Worlds, it's just something that really bothers me. Here's the thing about the deck. It pluses from doing things that it's not supposed to do. You discard a card from the graveyard, you get a Dark World, you get an effect, rinse and repeat. It disrupts strategies, so it's super anti-meta, which is something I really logically should like, except it does it in such a weird way. I think Kasame from Underground Members X put it the best, that it's like a weird, cheesy archetype, and it just feels like someone dirty plays it. Someone that goes, oh, let me take a look at your cards over here. I'm gonna put my fingers all up in those sleeves. And you say, ugh, stay away from my deck. I will have none of this. So, needless to say, Dark World's not my favorite archetype. I think the only reason I could hang with them is just because Six Samurai didn't have any hand advantage at the time, so Dark World dealings and hand destruction just didn't work against them, which cut their arsenal in half. Thankfully, it's really gimmicky, and it kind of dropped out of favor pretty quickly after a little while. But it left enough of a scar on me and the Six Samurai sword to push it to number 4. Number 3. Bujins. Logically, I should have put Minolches here. Here's why I put Bujins. Bujins just had this weird protect the castle sort of mentality, and they had too many different ways to protect the castle. They were a light archetype, so they benefited a lot from generic light support, especially Honest. They were a Beast Warrior archetype, so they benefited a lot from the Beast and Beast Warrior generic support like Fire Fist. So they could hybrid the best out of those things without ruining their consistency. Then they'd focus on having a single monster which had no clear nor apparent reason that you couldn't kill, until you realized why you couldn't kill it. You often got forced into fighting one monster at a time, but still the format was just long enough to the point where I always remembered them going clear into Yugioh, so I'd still see him, and that was more than enough for me to put him in number 3 spot. Number 2. Full Power MM, or Performapal Performage, if you wanted to go ahead and call it Pepe here, but I really hated that name. It sounded stupid. So on top of the stupid name, it was just such a quick, powerful deck that had such a ridiculous ceiling, such ridiculous representation, and there was such a gap in between that and the other decks. I remember one time going to locals, playing Odd Eyes Magician. I had some really great matches against Cosmo, really great matches against Monarchs, against Heroes, against Yangtze, and everything was pretty well balanced. Up until I got to Performapals, and using even the best of my techniques just got blown out of the water. We were talking Twin Twister everything, and it was insane. I think that's probably what left the most impression on me, but just the sheer amount of card advantage that you could gain from it. The Draco Pals, and using the Draco face-off, and using the Pot of Greed combo, you ended up with like 12 or 13 Synchro monsters on the board at a time, because this was before Master Rule 4, and you could do this sort of thing. And it would happen so consistently. That was the scariest part. You could get a board full of giant boss monsters with 2,500 to 3,000 attack points and the ability to clear your board on turn 1 every single time. And that's just disturbing. That much power was willing to put it to number 2 for me. And my number 1 least favorite deck, Necros. Here's the thing I don't like about Necros. For being a ritual archetype, they were too consistent and too powerful for too long. You had the Jinlock, you also had Shrits that could really pump up their consistency quite a bit. Almost every single one of them functioned as a hand trap too. Again, this was a period in time where hand traps hadn't quite gotten as popularized as they are today, though there were very few ways to counter hand traps back then. There are very few of them to counter it now too, but it was even worse back then because we didn't have Solemn Strike and we didn't have the different power that we have now. And, you know, it was prevalent, it was an unattainable deck, and it was just ridiculously powerful. Not as powerful as Performapal and Performage, but at least that had kind of a fun theme. These were really ridiculous, cool-looking monsters that were based off of banned monsters that were allowed to be at 3. You couldn't have one Trishula, but if you had Necros Trishula, you could have as many as you want. No Brinac for you, but if you had Necros Brinac, you could have 3. It just struck me as inherently unfair. They did a quick little retrain and apparently everything was fixed. So the Blue Boys definitely make it to my number 1 spot.